Thousands of years before the first pyramids rose from the sands of Egypt, in the land between two rivers, Sumer, mankind believed they were not the first masters of the earth. From the depths of the heavens, mysterious beings known as the Anunnaki descended, built cities, founded kingships, and wrote the first lines of human history. But who were they? Were they true gods or travelers among the stars? Tonight, as every sound slowly fades into silence, let this story carry you back to the dawn of beginnings, to that sacred place where clay and divine blood mingled as one, where humanity was first molded by the will of celestial beings. Together, we shall unveil the full tale of the Anunnaki. From the moment they shaped the cosmos, ruled divine dynasties, until the day they vanished into the mists of legend. Close your eyes, loosen your mind, and let this tale guide you through 5,000 years of mystery, where sleep and myth become one, where the Anunnaki still wait to be heard. When night descends upon the T-shaped land between the Euphrates and Tigris, when the dunes lie still in the chill wind and the ruins whisper under moonlight, a question echoes in the depths of thought. Why did mankind worship the gods? And where did they come from? Let us journey back more than 5 millennia to the cradle of civilization, Sumer, the first kingdom of Mesopotamia, where it was believed that divine beings called the Anunnaki had appeared. They were not mere deities, but architects of the cosmos, shaping the very boundaries between heaven and earth, between the infinite and the finite. According to the ancient texts, they were the offspring of Anu, for Anu, or An, was the supreme sky god, lord of the heavens, the symbol of divine authority surpassing all mortal understanding. Archaeological records suggest that the name Anunnaki derived from An, heaven, and the suffix Unna-bach-naki, meaning offspring, descendants, or those who belong to heaven and earth. Imagine this. Before cities rose with their temples and ziggurats, the Sumerians gazed upward, searching for a higher order. They did not create gods by chance. They assigned them cosmic roles. In that primal consciousness, the Anunnaki were not strange beings of superstition. They were the essence of order itself, the reflection through which mankind could locate its place within the vast universe. And here, one of the most famous phrases of modern myth is often recalled: "Those who from heaven to earth came." If you have ever heard that phrase, you have already brushed against the ancient imagination humanity still carries. In many modern retellings of the Anunnaki legend, it evokes the intervention of higher beings descending from the skies. Yet in the original Sumerian and Akkadian texts, the meaning is more symbolic and theological than literal. An echo of divine hierarchy, not of alien visitation. But why, 5,000 years ago, did the Sumerians place the Anunnaki at the center of their universe? Because in that fragile dawn of civilization, survival depended on the belief in cosmic order, the harmony between earth, water, sky, and destiny. They looked upward and saw Anu. They looked downward and saw Ki, the earth. Between these two poles stood the Anunnaki, the bridge between heaven and mankind. One ancient scholar interpreted the myth this way: before Enlil was born, Heaven and earth were inseparable. It was only when Enlil, the sun, came into being that heaven and earth were divided, thus creating the duality that defines existence. In many Sumerian myths, the Anunnaki were the divine judges of mankind, the arbiters of fate, the regulators of the cosmos. They were not distant entities floating beyond reach. They encircled the world as unseen laws, the fundamental architecture without which creation would collapse into chaos. In Sumerian mythology, myths of origins, there is a passage that reads, "The Anunnaki who stood about him, he placed it, the pickaxe, as a gift in their hands. They soothe Enlil with prayer. They give the pickaxe to the black-headed people." These words reveal the Anunnaki standing beside the great gods, granting tools, comforting with prayers, guiding creation. Their role was not of self-serving intervention, but of divine governance, the sacred mechanism by which existence was maintained. Especially in the hymns dedicated to Enki, one of the three supreme deities, we find a declaration of divine inheritance. "My father, the king of heaven and earth, made me famous in heaven and earth. I brought the arts and crafts. I am the firstborn of An. I bring prosperity to perfection." This is more than praise. It is proclamation. The Anunnaki were not merely descendants, but chosen bearers of heavenly power. Enki presented himself as the bringer of wisdom and craftsmanship, the god of intellect and creation, who carried the knowledge of the gods to mankind. And when we look back to that beginning, a world where heaven and earth were still one, where divine light still clung to the primordial clay, a vision unfolds. The Anunnaki descending not with thunder, but with silent purpose. They did not seek worship. They built order, ignited the idea of power and law within the human soul. The Sumerians told that when Anu exhaled his first breath, the heavens trembled, and from that breath came children who bore his will. They walked the earth, watching the first humans as they built homes, dug canals, and planted the first seeds of grain. And they smiled, knowing that life was unfolding as heaven intended. From that moment onward, mankind began to etch symbols into clay tablets, stories of gods glimpsed in dreams or in flashes of dawn between storms. Those marks, unearthed millennia later, still whisper the same truth. Before mankind could count time, before they knew how to pray, there were already those called beings of heaven and earth. The Anunnaki, the first architects of human destiny. When the first light of dawn broke across the plains of Mesopotamia, where the eternal rivers Euphrates and Tigris still wound their way like twin galaxies fallen to earth, the gods known as the Anunnaki, having established order between heaven and earth, quietly withdrew into their sacred temples. They no longer shaped the world directly, but entrusted that divine mission to humankind, frail beings, yet born in the image of their creators. And from that moment, a new chapter in the story of humanity began. If the previous age was the era of origins, when the cosmos was molded by divine hands, then this was the age of holy kings, when mortals were granted the right to rule and became the bridge between the mortal and the divine. The Sumerians called it the time when kingship descended from heaven. The first lines of the ancient Sumerian king list still bear witness to this belief. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, a brief line. Yet it opens a world where kingship did not belong to mankind. It was a sacred gift bestowed by the gods. This kingship was not merely for governance. It was to maintain cosmic order, ensuring that the world the Anunnaki had built would not collapse into chaos. At the dawn of that civilization, Eridu was revered as the first city of humankind, the dwelling of Enki, Lord of Wisdom and Waters. The Sumerians called it Abzu, House of the Primordial Deep. From this holy seat, the gods watched over humanity and chose one worthy to rule in their stead. That man was Alulim, the first king of mankind. According to the Sumerian king list, Alulim reigned for 28,800 years, followed by Alalngar, who ruled Eridu for 36,000 years. Though these numbers defy reason, they were never meant to be literal. They represent divine cycles, where time was not measured in years, but in the breaths of gods. In those days, kingship was from the gods. They reigned not for years, but for ages. It was a golden age, a time when gods and men still walked side by side. Eridu stood as the meeting point between two worlds, its temple of Enki casting a pale blue light that shimmered upon the waters. People believed that whenever incense smoke rose to the heavens, the Anunnaki would descend through a pillar of light, connecting sky and earth. When the gods still trod upon the earth, men did not merely worship, they conversed and learned. Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation, was said to have given humankind language, writing, and craftsmanship, so that they might understand and uphold the order of the universe. An ancient hymn still echoes across the ages. Enki, Lord of Wisdom, the master of Eridu, has given understanding to mankind. He has placed the holy crown upon the king's head. This verse reveals that kingship was not inherited by blood, but conferred through divine choice. Each king was a mediator, a chosen vessel between heaven and earth. After Eridu, kingship passed to other cities, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipar, and Shurupak, each guarded by its own patron god, each ruled by a king regarded as a ray of divine light, cast upon the mortal realm. In Bad Tibira, the third king recorded was Enmenluana, known as the shepherd chosen by the gods, whose name was written in the stars. Enmenluana, the shepherd chosen by the gods, whose name was written in the stars. The Sumerians believed that every king possessed a star bearing his name, for when the Anunnaki granted kingship, they also inscribed the king's destiny among the constellations. Thus, kingship was not merely a throne. It was a mark of fate. During that golden age, mankind lived in harmony. There was no war, no hunger. Harvests were plentiful, and the rivers flowed gently. Gods and men coexisted, sharing the same world. A sacred chant told of that time. The land was green, the rivers ran clear, men walked with gods and spoke without fear. But as with all eternal cycles, such balance could not last forever. As humanity multiplied and their prayers grew loud, the gods grew weary. Within the divine council, Enlil complained, "The noise of mankind has become too great. I cannot sleep for their clamor." That seemingly simple lament marked the first fracture between gods and men. The last kings of that divine age, such as Ubaratutu of Shurupak, were said to be the final rulers to receive direct guidance from the Anunnaki. His son, Ziusudra, would later be warned by Enki in a dream of a coming great flood, heralding a new chapter in human destiny. From that moment on, heaven and earth were irreversibly divided. The gods withdrew into their celestial realms, while mankind entered an age of trial and forgetfulness. Today, when archaeologists unearth the Sumerian king list, they find numbers that seem impossible. Tens of thousands of years for each reign. Yet hidden within those figures lies a subtle truth. The Sumerians were not recording history, but myth, written in the language of eternity. Their time was not measured by the sun or moon, but by the rhythm of the gods' breath. From Eridu to Shurupak, from Alulim to Ubaratutu, every king stood as proof of one eternal belief, that mankind once lived under the grace of the gods, and every kingdom began beneath the sky. And tonight, when the wind drifts across the ruins of Eridu, if you listen closely, you might still hear that ancient whisper. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. A reminder that every power, every dynasty, every soul will, in the end, return to where it began, between heaven and earth, beneath the eternal gaze of the Anunnaki. As the age of the divine kings drew to a close, the world began to change. The gods no longer walked upon the earth as they once had, and the whispers that once descended from the heavens grew distant, faint as dreams fading with dawn. Humanity, now left to its own fragile will, had to learn how to remember, how to rebuild the symbols, the rituals, the sacred houses that could reconnect the invisible thread once binding heaven and earth. And so, from the barren deserts and endless plains, the first monuments of humankind began to rise. Temples, dwellings of the gods and hearts of the world itself. Eridu, the first city, once ruled by Enki, became the spiritual center of the Anunnaki. The Sumerians called his temple E-Abzu, meaning House of the Deep Waters. In ancient memory, it was not merely a structure of brick and clay. It was the place where heaven touched earth, where the breath of the gods mingled with the rhythm of mortal life. The Sumerian builders labored tirelessly, stacking sun-dried mud bricks one upon another, raising each tier toward the sky, until the structure stood as an artificial mountain in the middle of the plain. The earliest vision of the ziggurat, forerunner of the great step pyramids. The Sumerians believed these ziggurats were the mountains of heaven and earth, sacred axes connecting two realms, the paths upon which gods could descend and mortals could lift their prayers upward. An ancient hymn dedicated to the temple E-Abzu preserved their reverence. House, founded in the deep, whose shadow covers heaven and earth. Shrine of the god of wisdom, where the fates are determined. The temple was not merely a house of worship. It was the throne of destiny. Within its depths, the Sumerians believed, There lay a hidden chamber, the Dukug, the assembly hall of the gods, where the Anunnaki gathered whenever the order of creation needed to be renewed. There, they spoke of life and death, of justice and chaos, of the fate of humankind. In the sacred texts, each divine council was presided over by Enlil, lord of air and earth, with Enki, keeper of wisdom and law, by his side, and Ninhursag, the mother goddess, embodiment of life itself. One ancient passage from the debate between Enki and Enlil captures this divine assembly. The Anunnaki, the great gods, sat to determine the fates. Enlil spoke first. Enki answered with wisdom. In the imagination of Sumer, such meetings were the very moments in which the world was rewritten. Every decision a stroke of destiny, a decree that could bless or curse the children of men. Eridu was the beginning, but not the only sanctuary. As the world grew broader, Nippur rose to become the spiritual heart of Sumer. If Eridu belonged to Enki, god of wisdom and water, then Nippur was the realm of Enlil, god of wind, breath, and divine authority. The Sumerians called his temple Ikur, the house of the mountain. It was a mountain not of stone, but of spirit. The imagined peak uniting the powers of heaven and earth. A hymn to Nippur declares, Ikur, temple of Enlil, the mountain house of heaven and earth, where gods and men meet, where destinies are decreed. That vision reveals a world where religion, power, and knowledge intertwined as one. In every Sumerian city, the temple was not merely a place of prayer, but the center of governance, learning, and trade. It was within those sacred walls that the scribes, the Dubsar, pressed the first wedge-shaped signs into wet clay, giving birth to writing itself. Every record of law, tax, and poetry originated from the temple's shadow. The temple became the soul of the city, the point to which all roads led. The people believed that when the sun rose, the first light touching the ziggurat summit was the sign that the gods were still listening. One ancient inscription preserved the prayer of a man from Nippur. O Lord Enlil, shepherd of the lands, let your gaze fall upon your temple. Let your breath of life renew the earth. This prayer reveals the profound bond between humanity and the divine, a relationship born of awe and reverence, yet sustained by a deep and desperate hope. When night descended, incense smoke rose from the temple terraces, drifting upward into the heavens, like the souls of lamps, searching for their way home to the realm of the gods. From those tiered roofs, the priests lifted their voices in chants, sacred syllables so ancient that only they still knew their meaning. The hymns trembled in the wind, carrying the echoes of vanished centuries. In Sumerian ritual, it was believed that the gods did not appear in form, but in vibration, in the trembling of air, in light rippling across water, in visions that came through dreams. Thus, every act of worship was a silent dialogue, man offering devotion, God answering through silence. From Eridu to Nippur, from Abzu to Kur, mankind built bridges between heaven and earth, not from stone or gold, but from faith. And within that faith, they shaped the first religious order of humankind. A system born not only from fear, but from reverence for the laws of the cosmos. The Sumerians believed that every soul, every grain of sand, every drop of water bore within it the imprint of the Anunnaki. To them, there was no divide between the material and the divine. Both were one and the same. Perhaps it was within this unity that religion was born, not merely as belief, but as a way of remembering that once the gods had walked among men, had sat in the council of heaven, and had whispered about our fate. Tonight, if one were to stand among the ruins of Nippur, beneath the star-crowded skies of Mesopotamia, one might still envision those ancient steps rising toward the heavens. And if one listened closely, perhaps the echo of a forgotten voice might drift through the broken walls. Kur, Temple of Enlil, the mountain of heaven and earth. A whisper across millennia, reminding us that temples were never merely places of prayer, but the spine of the world itself. They bound humanity to the divine, past to present, earth to sky. And it is there, among bricks and wind, between the mortal hand and the will of the gods, that the order of the cosmos endures, upheld by both mankind and the eternal will of the Anunnaki. When the first temples rose upon the plains, when rituals were born and hymns ascended with fragrant smoke into the heavens, it seemed that mankind had once again found its connection to the divine. Yet amid the multitude of gods worshipped across Mesopotamia, gods of water and sun, of wind and grain, the Sumerians believed that all cosmic power flowed from a single source, a grand celestial hierarchy upheld by three sacred pillars, Anu, Enlil, and Enki. As an ancient relief once told, above all sits Anu, beneath him Enlil rules the earth, and below, in the deep waters, Enki gives life. These three were not merely deities, they were the spirit and structure of Sumerian order itself. If in the previous age, temples served as gateways uniting heaven and earth, now within those very temples, mankind began to understand that each god governed a distinct realm of existence: the heavens, the earth, and the deep waters. There, power, nature, and wisdom intertwined, forming what would become known as the Divine Triad. At the highest vault of the sky sat Anu, the god of heaven, father of the gods, symbol of sacred law and absolute authority. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonians praised him as Anu, father of the gods, who in the heights established their names. Anu was not merely a sovereign over other deities. He was the very embodiment of the cosmos in its purest form, the realm of perfect light and order. The Sumerians believed that when he spoke, the heavens fell silent, and when he raised his hand, the stars altered their course. They called him Anshar Shar, heaven of the heavens, to signify that his dominion extended beyond all that mortal eyes could see. Though supreme, Anu rarely interfered in mortal affairs. He entrusted the governance of the tangible world to his son, Enlil, while he remained a distant, watchful father enthroned at the unreachable pinnacle of heaven. A Sumerian prayer to him still breathes through the ages. O Anu, king of the gods, supreme in the heavens, may your gaze fall upon us, may your justice be our light. Beneath Anu stood Enlil, lord of air, wind, and earth, the keeper of order in both nature and the human world. If Anu represented the stillness of divine law, Enlil was that law in motion, the breath of the world, the force of the storm, the authority of kings. His name, Enlil, means Lord of Wind, but in the deeper theology of Sumer, it carried a greater meaning, Lord of the breath of life. The Sumerians believed that when Enlil breathed, men lived, and when he was silent, the world perished. In the hymn to Enlil, they sang, Father Enlil, King of all lands, who alone is exalted, whose word is law, the fate of heaven and earth rests in your hand. This hymn captures the magnitude of Enlil's authority. He ruled not only over men, but over other gods, determining the destiny of all. In the councils of the Anunnaki, Enlil's voice was the first to speak and the last to be heard. It was he who once decreed the Great Flood, to cleanse the earth when mankind's clamor and corruption broke the balance of creation. Yet Enlil was not solely wrathful. He was also protector of Nippur, the sacred city, the religious heart of Sumer. Within his temple, Ikur, he was revered as the mountain of heaven and earth. The people of Sumer believed that every breeze passing through the ripened fields was the breath of Enlil, bringing life to all things. If Anu was the father of the gods, and Enlil the ruler of the world, then Enki, the third divine pillar, was wisdom, compassion, and creativity incarnate. He governed the Absu, the deep primordial waters, the wellspring of life itself. In one of the oldest hymns, Enki proclaims, My father, the king of heaven and earth, made me famous in heaven and earth. I brought the arts and crafts. I am the firstborn of An. I bring prosperity to perfection. Enki ruled not by thunder or command, but by understanding and mercy. He taught mankind language, mathematics, craftsmanship, and ritual. When Enlil sought to destroy humanity in the flood, it was Enki who defied him, whispering a warning in a dream to Atrahasis, the righteous man, so that life might endure. In Eridu, his sacred city, the temple Iabzu stood as a monument to knowledge and creation. The Sumerians called him by many names: Lord of Wisdom, Master of the Deep Waters, Father of Civilization. To the ancients, Enki was light within darkness, the current of intelligence flowing through the rivers of existence. Together, Anu, Enlil, and Enki formed the Triad of divine authority. Not only the foundation of their faith, but the structure of their entire civilization. Each god reflected an aspect of humanity itself: will, power, and wisdom. Anu was the creator. Enlil was the ruler. Enki was the preserver. These three forces moved in harmony, like the breath of the cosmos. When one was silent, the other two spoke, keeping the world from collapsing into chaos. The Sumerians understood that for life to exist, heaven must have law, earth must have order, and water must have wisdom. Thus, they built their religion as a reflection of the universe itself. In every ceremony, these three gods were invoked first. Every prayer began with their names: Anu above, Enlil below, Enki in the deep. May the heavens, the earth, and the waters be at peace. Through such words, mythology ceased to be mere story. It became the pattern of reality. From these divine models, mankind learned to shape kingdoms, laws, and societies. They came to understand that true power must be tempered by wisdom and compassion. And when night falls upon the ancient plains of Sumer, when the moon glimmers upon the waters of Eridu, and the wind sighs through the ruins of Nippur, one can still feel the quiet presence of the three divine pillars. Anu in the heavens, Enlil upon the earth, and Enki in the deep. Three currents of power still flow, binding sky and soil, as though the universe itself still breathes. And perhaps, if one listens closely beneath the night wind of Mesopotamia, one might still hear that distant echo. Anu in heaven, Enlil on earth, Enki in the waters. Together they hold the world in balance. A whisper to remind us that the order of the cosmos was forged not by strength alone, but by harmony. And within that harmony, mankind found the most sacred truth ever known, that the divine dwells not far above, but all around, in the sky, in the soil, and in the flowing waters of life everlasting. From the dawn of time, when the three divine pillars, Anu, Enlil, and Enki, had established the order of the cosmos, the world lay in a state of tranquil harmony. Heaven had its law, earth had its breath, and the waters possessed wisdom. Yet amidst this balance of light and shadow, one thing was missing: a hand to build, a being to tend and preserve the works of the gods. The noble Anunnaki, the descendants of Anu, looked down upon the earth and saw that the labor of maintaining creation had become too burdensome. The lesser gods, known as the Igigi, toiled endlessly, digging canals, raising dikes, keeping the rivers in motion. But as the ages stretched on, their strength waned, and discontent grew within their hearts. In the Atrahasis epic, this divine rebellion is preserved upon clay tablets over 4,000 years old. When the gods, instead of man, did the work, bore the loads, the gods' load was too great, the work too hard, the trouble too much. After centuries of toil, the Igigi rose up against Enlil, who had decreed their unending labor. They set their tools aflame, encircled his palace, and shouted into the night, "Burn your tools, set fire to your spades, let us face Enlil, the one who drives us like beasts." Thus came the first rebellion of the gods, a crisis within the celestial realm itself. Enlil's wrath shook the heavens with thunder, yet it was Enki, god of wisdom and compassion, who intervened. He spoke before the council of the Anunnaki. "Let us create a being who will bear the load of the gods." A new creature was to be fashioned, one that would take up the burdens of the divine. That creature would be man. Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag undertook this sacred task together. They descended into the deep Abzu, drawing forth holy clay, the primal substance of life hidden in the womb of the earth. Enki spoke, "Mix the heart of clay that is over the abyss. Good and upright gods, mix it with your flesh and blood." In the dim light of the temple Iabzu, where the oil lamps flickered like distant stars, the clay was mingled with the blood of a sacrificed god, one wise and divine. Through solemn ritual, this sacred mixture was shaped by divine hands, and from it emerged the form of humanity, half of earth, half of heaven. And when Enki breathed into them their first breath, he said, "You have been fashioned in my likeness. Upon you, I bestow the toil of the gods." Man opened his eyes, beholding a radiant sky, hearing the murmur of the Tigris and Euphrates, and for the first time, he felt fear and wonder and longing. Enlil, gazing upon this creation, spoke softly, "If they are to serve, they must also learn." Thus Enki bestowed upon mankind the foundations of knowledge, how to plant and harvest, to mold clay, forge copper, weave nets, build dwellings, and inscribe the wedge-shaped signs upon wet earth. These were not mere skills, but divine gifts, the legacy of the God of wisdom. Mankind became the bearer of the god's labor, yet also the only being who could look upward and name the stars. The world blossomed into harmony. Temples rose along the rivers, incense spiraled toward the sky. Men brought offerings, and the gods sent rain and bountiful harvests. In the hymn to Enki, the Sumerians sang, "O Enki, Lord of wisdom, you brought forth mankind from clay. You gave them speech and taught them the way of life." But not all the gods were pleased. Though Enlil acknowledged the usefulness of humanity, he feared their number, their noise, and their freedom. He warned the divine assembly, "The noise of mankind has become too great. Their clamor keeps me from rest." That complaint would later echo through time, a foreshadowing of the tragedy to come, when gods and men would drift apart, and faith would stand at odds with freedom. Yet in those first days, creation was still pure. Enki smiled as he watched the first humans stand upright, wield tools, and work the soil. Ninhursag, the Holy Mother, placed her hand upon their brows and whispered, "Be blessed, my children. You are of clay, but your spirit is divine." From that moment, mankind's long journey began, a path of both grace and burden. They lived to serve, yet through service they learned creation. They worshipped, yet through prayer they began to question. The Sumerians believed that humanity was not made merely to labor, but to sustain the bridge between the mortal and the divine. Every ritual, every chant, every melody rising from Iabzu or Ikur was part of that ancient covenant. The gods gave breath, and men returned faith. When night fell and silver moonlight washed over the tiered temples, priests would whisper the words of their origin story. From the blood of a god and the clay of the earth, mankind was born to bear the yoke of heaven. Those words echoed through millennia, becoming woven into the eternal memory of the human race. Empires would crumble, temples would turn to dust, yet the idea of mankind's divine creation endured, unbroken. Man, bearer of the spirit of gods and the body of earth, became the living symbol of harmony, frail yet proud, servant yet masterpiece of the universe. Even now, when we gaze upon the surviving Sumerian tablets, the wedge-shaped lines still whisper the same truth, that mankind was not born by chance, but by divine design. A decision written in clay and blood, by the will of the three great powers, Anu, Enlil, and Enki. A decision that began the age of man, beings small in form, but carrying within their hearts the fire of the heavens. And if tonight you stood beneath the ancient skies of Mesopotamia and saw the stars gleaming like the forgotten script of gods, perhaps you would hear Enki's voice carried on the wind. You were born of earth, but your spirit is mine. Remember the clay. Remember the stars. A gentle reminder, whispered from the beginning of time, that within each of us, there still lives a fragment of the divine, still echoes the first breath of creation. After Enki and Ninhursag fashioned mankind from clay and the blood of a god, the world blazed with new life. Humans labored, built, sowed, and sang hymns of devotion to the Anunnaki. At dawn, the sound of grinding grain, of flowing rivers, and the laughter of children echoed across the plains of Mesopotamia, carried on the wind like words of gratitude. The gods bestowed upon them abundance, the rains from above, the fertile winds of Enlil, the gentle rhythm of life. For a long time, harmony reigned between gods and men, like breath flowing ceaselessly between heaven and earth. But as the ages passed, mankind multiplied. They built cities, carved canals, and turned every inch of soil to their will. Their voices, their songs, their cries, once melodies of praise, grew into a roar, the restless noise of humankind, and the gods, high above, could no longer find their peace. The Atrahasis, Epic tells it thus: the land expanded and the people multiplied. The land was bellowing like a bull. The god was disturbed by their noise. Enlil heard the clamor and said to the gods, "The noise of mankind has become too great. I cannot sleep because of their uproar." That complaint marked the beginning of one of the greatest catastrophes in Sumerian myth. Enlil, lord of air and earth, gazed down in fury. To him, mankind, beings created to serve, had forgotten their place. They had grown wild, free, and too numerous. "The order of the cosmos is in peril," he proclaimed before the council of the Anunnaki, and decreed punishment upon the human race. The first judgment came as plague. The earth grew dry, rivers shrank, and men fell ill by the thousands. In desperation, humanity gathered in temples, offering sacrifices, crying for mercy. But Enlil had closed his ears to their prayers. In the shadows, however, Enki, god of wisdom and water, looked down with compassion. He pitied the children molded by his own hands. Within his temple Abzu, where sacred waters flowed beneath the earth, He whispered to Nintu, the mother goddess of life, "Let us not destroy mankind, but let the sickness cease. Let life continue, though diminished." With cunning and mercy, Enki found a way to help mankind endure. He sent secret counsel to Atrahasis, a wise and righteous man. In a dream, speaking through the reeds of his house so that Enlil might not hear, Enki said, "Wall, listen to me. Reed wall. Pay attention to all my words. Tear down your house. Build a boat. Abandon possessions and save life. Bring seed of every kind into the boat." Atrahasis Epic. Atrahasis understood. It was Enki's voice. He obeyed in silence, building a great vessel, sealed with resin and pitch, vast enough to hold food, water, and the seed of all living things. Meanwhile, Enlil's punishments deepened. After plague came famine, then drought, and at last, the final judgment, the great flood. The divine council was summoned. Enlil declared, "Let the rain of destruction pour for 7 days and 7 nights. Let mankind be swept away from the face of the earth." The other gods fell silent. Only Enki bowed his head, speaking no word, for he knew destruction was at hand. The skies darkened, winds screamed, the seas rose, and thunder shattered the heavens. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the terror was written so. The storm was terrible, and when it came, the gods were afraid. They retreated. They ascended to the heaven of Anu. The gods cowered like dogs, crouching outside the walls. For 7 days and 7 nights, the waters raged. Mountains sank. Cities vanished beneath the waves. Mankind, proud, fragile, defiant, was swallowed by the sea. But amid the tempest, Atrahasis's ship drifted upon the waters. He heard the roar of wind and thunder and held fast to faith in Enki's promise. When at last the storm ceased, he opened a small window in the roof and released a dove, then a swallow. Both returned, finding no land. Finally, he sent a raven, and it did not return. Atrahasis knew the earth had reappeared. He opened the door, stepped onto the cleansed ground, and knelt. He built an altar and offered sacrifice to the gods. The scent of burning incense rose heavenward. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it is written, "The gods smelled the sweet savor. The gods gathered like flies over the sacrifice." Seeing the smoke, Enlil grew furious, for he realized that humanity had survived. But Enki spoke gently to him. "O Enlil, do not be angry. Consider, for he is wise and righteous. Do not destroy all mankind. Let a remnant remain to bear the name of men." Hearing these words, Enlil's rage subsided. He understood that life could not be erased entirely, for without men, who would bring offerings, who would speak the names of the gods. Thus, after the flood, a new covenant was forged between gods and men. The Anunnaki decreed, "Let them be few, so that the land may be at peace. Let their days be numbered. Let them know the measure of their life." From that decree, human lifespans were shortened, and birth was limited, a balance to preserve order. From then on, mankind lived in awe, in prayer, listening to the whispers of divinity through wind, through water, through dreams. The great flood had passed, yet its memory was carved deep into the soul of humanity. Men no longer dared defy the gods, but neither did they forget the mercy of Enki, the god who placed compassion above command. From the ashes of ruin rose a new civilization, humbler, wiser, faithful to the balance the Anunnaki had wrought. Tonight, if you stand among the ancient ruins of Eridu or Nippur and hear the wind wailing through the broken temples, you might think you hear the distant surge of waves, the echo of that ancient flood. And within that wind still resounds the voice from the deep, the voice of Enki, father of wisdom, the one who saved mankind from being erased from the memory of the cosmos. I did not betray the gods. I preserved their creation. A reminder that, no matter how fierce divine wrath may be, mankind remains an inseparable part of cosmic order. For within every human breath still echoes the first breath of the gods. When the great flood at last receded, and the waters drew back to reveal the mud-soaked earth, the world stirred as though awakening from a long, heavy slumber. Above, the clouds still carried the color of ash. Below, grass lay flattened, walls and towers crumbled. Only traces of life remained, frail, uncertain, yet enduring, as if still pulsing with the breath of the gods. Mankind, those whom Enki had saved from the wrath of heaven, looked upon this new world, silent and bare, yet filled with promise. They knelt upon the damp ground and offered thanks to the Anunnaki. And there, amid the ashes, began a new age, the age of renewal, when the order between gods and men was restored. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the moment is remembered in lines of quiet reverence. When the storm had passed, the gods wept for mankind. They remembered their creation, and their hearts were moved to mercy. The tears of the gods fell to the earth, and the plains turned green once more. The Euphrates and Tigris flowed gently again. Mankind, now tempered by fear and gratitude, rebuilt their first homes. But unlike before, they no longer saw themselves as the center of creation. They understood that the world was both a gift and a lesson, left behind by divine hands. Enlil, once enraged by humanity's clamor, now softened. He gazed upon the cleansed world and sighed. Regret lingered in him, yet the order of the cosmos had to be upheld. Thus, the Anunnaki gathered once more to decide the fate of mankind. Enki, calm and wise, spoke to his brethren. Let us dwell among them again, not as masters, but as guardians. Let the cities rise, and in them, let our presence be the light they follow. From that decree, each god chose a sacred city upon the earth, a dwelling from which they would guide humanity anew. Enlil chose Nippur, the heart of Sumer, where he rebuilt the temple Eker, the house of the mountain, symbol of law and cosmic order. Enki, god of water and wisdom, returned to Eridu, where the first men had been shaped from his sacred clay. Inanna, radiant goddess of love and war, claimed Uruk, where she would teach mankind the arts of beauty, desire, and civilization. From these three holy centers, Nippur, Eridu, and Uruk, a new divine order was established. Each city became a kingdom unto itself, ruled under the gaze of its patron deity. The Sumerians said that from then on, every temple, every street, every canal bore the name of a god, and thus the bond between heaven and earth was tied once more. The gods dwelled within their sanctuaries, men lived beyond the gates, yet the thread between the two worlds had been rewoven. In the hymn to Enlil, the ancients wrote, "Father Enlil, shepherd of the lands, your command is unchanging. You speak, and the mountains bow. You decree, and cities are built." Those words revealed a new truth. The gods no longer walked among men, yet their will lived on through human hands. When men built homes, carved canals, and plowed the soil, they believed they were continuing the gods' work, preserving the divine order set at creation. In Eridu, Enki once again taught humanity the crafts of civilization: writing, mathematics, metallurgy, and law. He taught that all knowledge is light, and that light must be shared. An ancient inscription praised him with reverent simplicity. "Enki, Lord of Wisdom, you open the eyes of men. You place the me of civilization in their hands." Me being the sacred decrees, the divine foundations of art, music, and justice. In Uruk, Inanna, granddaughter of Enlil, goddess of brilliance and passion, taught humankind the beauty of love, fertility, and pride in creation. She was called Queen of Heaven and Earth, she who brought both ecstasy and renewal. Under her reign, Uruk blossomed into the shining jewel of the ancient world, the cradle of poetry, trade, and kingship. A hymn to her resounds across ages. Inanna, radiant one, to you belongs the fate of kings and nations. You make the small great, and the great small again. Yet during this harmony, the religion of Sumer transformed. Temples were no longer merely altars of worship. They became centers of power, of governance, and of learning. The end-priests and end-priestesses, servants of the gods, became both spiritual and civic leaders, mediating between divine will and mortal need. Here, divine authority and human rule intertwined, forming a theocratic order where every law, every harvest, every act of justice was done in the name of the gods. Inside the temples, Ikur, Iabzu, and Iana, chants echoed day and night. Clay tablets recorded everything: sacrifices, seasons, and the first codes of law. Civilization itself was born from sacred order. When the sun set and incense rose from the ziggurats, its glow mirrored upon the rivers. The Sumerians believed that the gods still dwelt upon the uppermost tier of those temples, the meeting point of heaven and earth. And in their dreams, they saw Enlil speaking decrees, Enki smiling in the waters, Inanna dancing among the stars. One of the temple hymns of Sumer declares, "Where heaven touches earth, there stand the temples of the gods. The Anunnaki enter and leave, their presence blessing the land." It was an age of balance, gods and men coexisting in mutual purpose. The gods bestowed law, knowledge, and prosperity. Mankind returned faith, labor, and devotion. But within harmony lies the seed of ambition. As men grew wiser, They began to reach higher, to draw nearer to their creators. The first kings after the flood began calling themselves chosen of Enlil, or beloved of Inanna. They built statues of themselves within temples, inscribed their names beside those of the gods. Enki looked down and murmured to Enlil, "They have learned much, perhaps too much." And Enlil replied, "So it begins again." His words carried both prophecy and resignation, a quiet acknowledgement that the cycle between gods and men would forever repeat: harmony, pride, and retribution, the eternal breath of the cosmos. Yet in that age of renewal, Sumer stood in its golden splendor. Beneath the night sky, the stars gleamed like the eyes of the Anunnaki watching over their creation. The flicker of oil lamps below, answering their light above. And perhaps, if you stood among the ruins of Nippur or Eridu today, and listened to the wind curling through the broken stones, you might still hear their whisper. We dwell among you still. In your cities, in your hearts, our order endures. A whisper reminding us that, after every storm and every ruin, what remains is order. The order between God and man, between earth and sky, between creation and destruction. An eternal cycle, written by the very hands of the Anunnaki. When order between gods and men had been restored after the Great Flood, the world of Sumer entered an age of splendor. The sacred cities, Nippur, Eridu, and Uruk, rose as new centers of power, where every brick laid, every prayer uttered, and every offering made bore the name of an Anunnaki god. That order, once forged through divine wrath and reconciliation, now evolved into a new era where power and ritual intertwined, shaping a theocracy that ruled not only over men's bodies, but over their souls. In the violet dusk of the Mesopotamian plains, the tiered ziggurats reached skyward like mountains made by human hands, gleaming in the amber light of the setting sun. Incense curled upward from hundreds of temples. Chants and hymns filled the open air like waves of sound. The Sumerians called this the Age of Inanna, the reign of the goddess of love, war, and fertility, whose divine presence united heaven and earth in sacred ecstasy. If Enlil symbolized the power of law and order, Inanna was the flame of life, the current of creative energy pulsing through the veins of the cosmos. She was not merely Enlil's daughter. She was the goddess of freedom, passion, and the yearning for light. In Inanna's descent to the underworld, she is described in words both tender and terrifying. Inanna, queen of heaven and earth, she who opens the gates of joy and sorrow. To her, the fates of kings and men are given. Inanna embodied both life and death, destruction and renewal. And in her city, Uruk, one of humanity's most sacred rites was born, the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage. It was the divine union between king and goddess, a ritual performed each year when the mortal ruler, representing mankind, would unite with Inanna through the high priestess of the temple, Eanna. This ceremony was not merely a celebration of love, but a cosmic reaffirmation of divine sovereignty over the mortal world. When the king united with the goddess, he became not just her lover, but her chosen one, the divinely appointed ruler of men. In the sacred marriage hymn of Inanna and Dumuzi, the goddess whispers, "O my beloved, the delight of my eyes, king of the land, your name is sweet as honey. You are chosen by An. You are loved by Inanna." From that time onward, each king of Uruk was regarded as the earthly embodiment of Dumuzi, Inanna's consort, the god of fertility. And through their union, the earth was renewed, the harvest restored, and the world reborn. On those nights, when the moon hung full above Uruk and silver light washed across the temple Eanna, the city rejoiced. Priests and citizens alike sang, danced, and poured wine upon the altars, praising Inanna and the king, the bearer of her divine light. It was a fusion of politics and devotion, of love and power. For the Sumerians believed that only when the gods bestowed love upon humanity could the cosmic order continue to thrive. An ancient text records, "The gods decreed kingship for mankind, and in the embrace of Inanna, the king receives the breath of heaven." From this belief, the concept of the divine kingship was solidified, the ruler as the earthly vessel of the gods. Temples were no longer places of prayer alone, but the nuclei of government and authority. Within their sacred walls, taxes were counted, laws inscribed, crops measured, and decrees proclaimed, all in the name of the divine. The great temples, Eanna in Uruk, Kur in Nippur, and Abzu in Eridu, became the hearts of Sumerian life. At once church, court, academy, treasury, and art house. The scribes, Dub-Sar, carved numbers, poems, and prayers onto clay tablets, each one a fragment of eternity. These words became the foundation of the first civilization. From within the temples flowed music, poetry, and art. For the Sumerians believed that creation itself was a sacred act, a mirror of divine expression. A hymn from the age declares, "The temple is the universe, its roof the heavens, its floor the earth. In it the gods dwell, and man serves them with song and wisdom." To them, every temple was a microcosm of the universe. Its summit touched the heavens, the realm of the gods. Its middle tiers housed the works of men. Its foundation lay upon the waters, where Enki's voice still whispered in the deep. There was no rigid boundary between divine and mortal, sacred and mundane. All was one continuous breath. During this time, Uruk rose as the radiant center of kingship and faith, ruled by monarchs who claimed descent from the divine. Among them was Gilgamesh, remembered as part god, part man. Legend says that he once entered the temple Eanna, stood before Inanna's statue and declared, "I am the son of Ninsun, 2/3 god, 1/3 man. In your temple, Inanna, I seek wisdom, not power." Though proud, his words reflected the spirit of that age, that a king was not merely a ruler, but a student of the divine. Thus, in every ceremony, the king did not stand above the altar but below it, gazing upward to the goddess, a reminder that all authority flows from divine love and grace. Yet behind the splendor of ritual lay the quiet conflict of humankind. For when faith became power, belief could be replaced by control. The priests, holding both spiritual and economic dominion, turned temples into centers of governance. And thus, the divine state reached its zenith. Even as hairline cracks began to appear beneath its perfection. Still, across millennia, the image of Inanna, brilliant, fierce, and compassionate, continued to shine. She remained the symbol of eternal vitality, of divine love offered to humankind. And when night falls upon Uruk, and moonlight glides down the ziggurat steps, the Sumerians, and all who remember, still lift their eyes and whisper, Inanna, bright star of the morning, queen of heaven and earth, shine upon us as you once shone upon our kings. A prayer soft as wind, carried through thousands of years. A reminder that every crown, every kingdom, every faith was born from one sacred bond, the eternal love between God and mankind. When Uruk still shimmered beneath the golden light of Inanna, when the sacred rites of the divine marriage still echoed beneath the silver glow of the moon, the world of Mesopotamia began to turn its gaze toward a new age. The ancient cities of Sumer, Eridu, Nippur, Lagash began to fade under the weight of centuries, while in the north, a new star rose above the horizon, Babylon. At first, Babylon was nothing more than a modest town upon the banks of the Euphrates. But under the rule of Semitic kings, it grew swiftly into the beating heart of politics, commerce, and religion, the new soul of Mesopotamia. From this place, a new myth was born, one both familiar and revolutionary. The tale of Marduk, son of Enki, the god who would forever alter the fate of heaven and earth. If Inanna had once embodied the harmony between love and power, Marduk came to represent order and triumph, the force of renewal that rose to replace the old divine hierarchies. The Babylonians said that Marduk was born when the world was still chaos, when heaven and earth were not yet divided, when the waters of Tiamat, the primordial sea goddess, still roared in the shadows of creation. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, the story begins with lines of solemn grandeur. When on high no name was given to heaven, and the earth beneath had not yet been named, when Apsu, the primeval, and Tiamat, who bore them all, mingled their waters together. No field was formed, no marsh was seen. From that mingled abyss came the first gods. Apsu, god of fresh waters, and Tiamat, goddess of the salt sea, gave birth to the younger gods, Anu, Enlil, and Enki, who shaped the cosmos and established the laws of heaven and earth. But soon, the younger gods, restless and loud, disturbed the stillness of the deep, just as mankind had once disturbed the heavens in the Atrahasis epic. Apsu, unable to bear their noise, resolved to destroy his offspring. Yet Enki, with cunning and wisdom, learned of the plot and struck first, slaying Apsu and bringing peace to the younger gods. Tiamat, the mother of creation, was consumed with rage. In grief and fury, she forged an army of monsters, serpents, dragons, and scorpion men, led by her new consort Kingu, and she declared war upon the heavens themselves. The gods trembled. They turned to Anu, then to Enlil, but none dared face Tiamat's wrath. Then Marduk, the young and radiant son of Enki, stepped forward and spoke. "If I am to be your avenger, if I am to defeat Tiamat and save you all, then proclaim me supreme among the gods. Let my word be law, and let none transgress it." The council of the Anunnaki agreed. They crowned him with glory, placed the scepter in his hand, and granted him the tablet of destinies, the symbol of absolute authority. From that moment, the war between order and chaos began. Marduk rose into the raging sea to confront Tiamat. He stretched his divine bow, the winds swirling about him, and shot his arrow through her heart. He seized the spear, he split her belly, he cut through her inward parts, he crushed her heart. Enuma Elish. When she fell, Marduk cleaved her colossal body in two, half to form the heavens, half to become the earth. He split her like a shellfish into two parts. Half of her he set up and sealed it as sky, drew a bolt across, stationed guards. Her waters he arranged that they should not escape. From Tiamat's eyes, Marduk made the rivers Euphrates and Tigris. From her breasts, he raised the mountains. From her hair, he formed clouds and mists, and from her final breath, he fashioned the winds of the world. Thus, from the death of chaos, the universe was reborn in perfect order. When the battle was done, Marduk returned to the divine council. The Anunnaki bowed before him, proclaiming, "Marduk, king of the gods, your word is supreme. Your decree cannot be altered. To you belong creation and command." From that day forth, Marduk was recognized as the sovereign of heaven and earth, uniting within himself the powers of Anu, sky, Enlil, earth, and Enki, water. And Babylon, his chosen city, became known as the Gate of Heaven. The temple Es-Sagila, built to honor him, became the heart of the world. Here, it was said, the boundary between heaven and earth dissolved, just as it had in the age of the Anunnaki, but now under the rule of Marduk, the divine king. Each year, during the Akitu festival, the Babylonians reenacted Marduk's victory over Tiamat. The priests recited the entire Enuma Elish, and the king of Babylon knelt before Marduk's statue to have his rule reaffirmed. It was the perfect union of religion and state, where divine authority sanctified human power. Historians would later call this the religious revolution of Babylon, for never before had all divine forces been unified under one God. Where once the cosmos had been ruled by three, heaven, earth, and sea, now all creation was bound in the hand of Marduk, the supreme deity. The Babylonians believed that through him the universe endured. The sun rose by his command. The stars followed the paths he drew, and the rivers flowed because his will sustained them. A temple hymn declared, "He created the stars, he set their paths, he made the moon to measure the days, and the sun to mark the seasons. Marduk, who restored order to the heavens." The rise of Marduk was more than the triumph of a god. It was the birth of a new civilization, one that reflected mankind's own awakening. If Sumer had been the era when gods walked among men, Babylon was the age when men raised the gods upon thrones. mirroring their own yearning for immortality. And so, through the centuries, Marduk became the center of worship, philosophy, and power. His name echoed through temples and palaces, inscribed upon clay tablets and sung by choirs of priests. He became the golden heir of the Anunnaki, the light that carried their legacy forward. Tonight, if you stand among the ruins of ancient Babylon, where the fired bricks still bear his name, you might see in your mind the golden glow of Esagila and hear faintly the ancient chant, Marduk, the great lord, king of the gods, who split the sea and made firm the earth. To you, the universe bows. An endless song, echoing across millennia. A reminder that every order, though born from chaos, requires a creator. And in the long night of history, Marduk stands as that flame, the light that binds heaven and earth, the eternal symbol of rebirth, order, and divine power. After the age of Marduk, when the golden light of Babylon spread across Mesopotamia, time once again began to shift. The old empires withered, the towering ziggurats crumbled into dust, and the cities once filled with incense and prayer now echoed only with the whispers of the past. Yet from the ashes of ancient kingdoms, a new power rose, fierce, radiant, and relentless, carrying the flame of the Anunnaki in the form of an empire of iron and blood. That power was Assyria. If Sumer was the age when gods walked among men, and Babylon the age when Marduk reshaped the cosmos, then Assyria was the era of power, war, and knowledge. An age where the divine was redefined by sword and stylus alike. The Assyrians believed themselves to be the rightful heirs of the Anunnaki, chosen by the gods to expand their dominion and spread divine order across the world. Upon the northern plains of Mesopotamia, they built their monumental cities, Ashur, Nimrud, Khorsabad, and Nineveh, jewels of the ancient world. And in the heart of each city, the central temple stood as the living link between heaven and earth. At the center of the empire stood Ashur, the supreme god of the Assyrians, the living embodiment of Enlil, Marduk, and the cosmic principle of divine order. If Marduk was king of the gods, then Ashur was revered as the god of kings. An inscription within the temple of Ashur reads, Ashur, Lord of hosts, the great mountain who grants kingship. His breath gives life to armies. His command brings nations to their knees. For the Assyrians, war was a sacred rite. Every campaign, every conquest, was a holy war waged in the name of their god. The king was not merely a general, but the earthly representative of Ashur, the executor of divine will. King Sennacherib once carved upon a stone stele his solemn vow before his god. By the command of Ashur, I destroyed, I burned, I rebuilt. My sword is his lightning, my chariot is his storm. Those words captured the spirit of the age, an age in which faith, power, and violence were inseparable, where bloodshed itself was seen as an act of devotion. To the Assyrians, the gods were not only givers of life, but testers of strength. The name of their chief deity, Ashur, was also the name of their first sacred city, from which the empire took its name. The image of Ashur adorned every stele, every palace wall, a winged solar disk, within which the god himself was depicted drawing his bow, soaring across the heavens, watching every battle unfold. Ashur represented the final evolution of Mesopotamian divinity, the culmination of all who had come before. He carried the sky of Anu, the might of Enlil, the wisdom of Enki, and the sovereign command of Marduk. The Assyrians praised him in their hymns. Ashur, Lord of the four regions, whose shadow covers heaven and earth, whose glance brings kings to glory, and whose wrath lays waste the proud. Under this divine order, every Assyrian city was a sacred fortress, every palace a temple of God and king alike. Upon the stone walls of Nimrud and Nineveh, reliefs still show monarchs standing tall, bow in hand, crowned with the winged headdress, the mark of Ashur's chosen. And when the empire reached its zenith, another king arose, Ashurbanipal, not only a conqueror, but a scholar king, whose legacy was not forged in iron, but in clay. In the 7th century BCE, Ashurbanipal built at Nineveh one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world, the Royal Library of Nineveh. There, he gathered more than 30,000 clay tablets, preserving the wisdom of ages, astronomy, medicine, law, ritual, and myth. In his own royal inscription he proclaimed, "I, Ashurbanipal, king of the world, learned the wisdom of Adapa, mastered the craft of writing upon clay. I have read the inscriptions of before the flood." The inscriptions of before the flood. Words both haunting and profound. They reveal that the king and his scholars knew they were guardians of the Anunnaki's memory, custodians of knowledge from an age when gods still spoke to men. Within Nineveh's library, archaeologists later discovered copies of the Enuma Elish, Epic of Gilgamesh, Atrahasis, and countless ancient hymns to Anu, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, and Marduk. Each tablet was a breath from the ancient world, carefully copied, catalogued, and preserved. A divine mythology transformed into theology, philosophy, and record. Nineveh became not just the capital of an empire, but the mind of humanity inscribed in clay. If the gods had once written the fate of men upon the tablet of destinies, now men wrote the destiny of knowledge upon clay. The Assyrian age marked the moment when myth became memory, and memory became history. The tales of the Anunnaki, of creation, flood, and divine order, were no longer merely told, but studied, analyzed, and immortalized. It was a transformation from belief to scholarship, from faith to preservation. The Assyrian priests were not just storytellers. They were keepers of the divine archive. They recited the old texts during festivals, taught them to apprentices, and carved them anew so that no divine word would vanish. The Chronicle of Ashur expresses this devotion in a single line. "What was written shall not perish, for the gods remember through the hands of men." Under Assyria's reign, power and knowledge existed in rare harmony. They conquered with the sword, but they endured through the word. They ruled in the name of the gods, but learned in their shadow, writing, thinking, preserving. When Nineveh fell in 612 BCE, flames consumed the palace of Ashurbanipal. But beneath the ashes, tens of thousands of tablets survived, silent witnesses to a vanished empire. It is through those tablets that we know today the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis Epic, the Enuma Elish, and the grand saga of the Anunnaki, from Sumer to Babylon to Assyria. If Marduk was the god who reshaped the universe, then Ashurbanipal was the man who preserved its wisdom. And in the silence of centuries, that act made him the last true heir of the gods. Tonight, if you stand among the ruins of Nineveh, where sand veils the ancient stones, imagine the faint whisper of clay, the wedge-shaped signs still murmuring across millennia. The gods wrote upon the clay of men, and men wrote upon the clay of the gods. A perfect circle, where myth becomes history, and history returns to the sacred. Within that circle, Assyria, empire of war, learning, and faith, remains eternal. A witness to the age when mankind and the divine together inscribed the fate of the world. As the fires of Nineveh faded, and the last embers curled upward like incense to the heavens, an age came to its quiet end. The clay tablets, once inscribed with the words of the gods, lay buried among the ruins, waiting for the touch of some distant hand. Assyria had fallen, and soon Babylon too would bow to the weight of time. Yet what they left behind did not vanish. For though mythology had been written in clay, it carried the soul of the sky, and that soul flowed onward like the eternal Euphrates, bearing the memory of the Anunnaki beyond the borders of fallen empires, into the lifeblood of new civilizations. From the ashes of Mesopotamia, the world entered an age of convergence, a time when the ancient myths and wisdom of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria were reborn in new tongues, new faiths, and new minds. The spirit of the gods no longer dwelled in ziggurats of stone, but hid itself within philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and the mysticism of both East and West. Across the vast plains of Persia, as the Achaemenid Empire rose, the Persians absorbed the essence of Mesopotamia, not only in the art of governance, but in the metaphysical vision of the universe. They inherited the image of divine creation and destruction, transforming it into new symbols within Zoroastrianism, the religion of the sacred fire. In that faith, the eternal battle between Ahura Mazda, Lord of Light, and Angra Mainyu, Spirit of Darkness, echoed the ancient struggle between Marduk and Tiamat, between order and chaos, between the radiance of the gods and the abyss of the primordial sea. The Persians believed the cosmos was woven from two opposing forces, and that life itself endured upon the fragile balance between them. It was an idea first whispered in the age of Enki and Enlil. One god to rule, one to preserve, one to build, one to break. Though their names changed, the essence remained, the universe as a theater of eternal forces. Within the fire temples of ancient Persia, as priests recited verses from the Avesta, they were continuing the same sacred tradition once practiced in the temples of Sumer, the chant of creation offered to heaven. One passage from the Avesta reads, "He who brings order from chaos, his fire purifies the world." The words sound like an echo from Enuma Elish, where Marduk split chaos in two and made the heavens firm. History, like a river, never flows in straight lines. It bends, it mingles, and it is reborn. And as time flowed on, Alexander the Great crossed the Tigris, and Greek warriors set foot upon the land once ruled by the Anunnaki. They gazed upon the ancient ruins, the colossal statues and tiered temples that reached toward the clouds, and they said, "We too once had gods such as these." Thus, the myths of Sumer and Babylon began to merge with the myths of Greece. To Greek scholars, Anu became Uranus, Enlil became Zeus, Inanna became Aphrodite, or Ishtar Astarte, and Enki, lord of water and wisdom, was seen as Poseidon or Hermes. The tales of creation, of divine wars and monstrous beasts, of the flood that cleansed the world, all were retold, reborn in Greek verse and philosophy. The historian Herodotus once wrote, "The gods of Babylon are not strangers to us. They wear different names, but their stories are the same." And Plato, in his contemplations on the soul and the order of the cosmos, drew upon the old Babylonian belief that the human spirit contains a fragment of starlight, the same celestial essence that once belonged to the Anunnaki. The Greek astrologers, when they lifted their eyes to the sky, no longer saw mere constellations. They saw the ancient gods moving among the stars. They inherited the Babylonian astronomy, built upon the sacred idea that each planet was a throne of a god. Thus, from Sumer to Athens, the celestial knowledge of the Anunnaki flowed onward, from clay tablets to papyrus scrolls, and would, centuries later, inspire works like Ptolemy's Almagest. And when the Greek world fell and the Arab winds swept across the Middle East, the story changed shape once more. During the Abbasid Caliphate, when Baghdad, the city of peace, became the intellectual heart of the world, Arab scholars translated Greek, Babylonian, and Sumerian texts into Arabic, preserving them within the great library of Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. There, thinkers such as al-Khwarizmi, al-Farabi, and al-Batani carried forward the torch of those who had come before them. They studied the heavens, calculated the stars, catalogued plants, wrote of anatomy and astrology, all fields first cultivated under Enki's guidance thousands of years earlier. Even within the sacred verses of Islam, echoes of the old myths could still be heard. Angels made of light, mankind formed from clay, and a divine being who bestowed knowledge upon Adam. Reflections of Enki and the first humans in the Atrahasis epic. As Islam spread, it absorbed the wisdom of Persia, Greece, and Babylon, transforming it into the universal knowledge of humankind. The gods of old no longer walked the earth, but their ideas endured. The belief in cosmic balance, in the origin of the soul, in the interplay of light and darkness. In medieval manuscripts, strange phrases began to appear. Those who came from the heavens, the first bearers of knowledge, the keepers of the stars. The echo of the Anunnaki had not vanished. It had merely changed form, hidden within the very sciences humanity would one day revere. An anonymous Arab scholar wrote in the 9th century, "Those who watch the stars remember the first watchers, for they taught us to measure the heavens." The first watchers. Perhaps he meant the ancient gods of Sumer, the beings who taught mankind to look upward and read the language of the cosmos. And so, across millennia, from the plains of Sumer to Persepolis, from Athens to Baghdad, from clay tablet to parchment scroll, the Anunnaki lived on, not as deities enthroned in the heavens, but as silent sparks within the light of human knowledge. Tonight, if you look up at the sky and see the stars scattered across the Milky Way, remember, somewhere in the endless dark, the ancient voices still whisper, "We taught you to build, to write, to dream. You are our echo beneath the stars." Thus, from myth came knowledge, and from faith came civilization. The Anunnaki, though no longer worshipped, still dwell within every lamp that burns, every equation written, every dream that seeks to understand the universe. For in the end, what they left behind was not dominion, but light. The eternal light that mankind still follows through the long night of history. When Baghdad, the city of light and knowledge, gleamed at the height of the Islamic Golden Age, Arab scholars gazed upon the heavens, traced numbers, and sought the invisible laws that bound all things. They did not know that with every equation, every verse, every whispered prayer, they were continuing a story begun 5 millennia earlier, on the plains of Sumer, where the Anunnaki first pressed into clay the mysteries of the cosmos. Through each civilization, from Persia to Greece, from Arabia to Europe, that light never went out. It flowed onward, merging with the current of human thought, until the age came when mankind began to understand. Myth never vanished. It only transformed into science, art, and the endless quest that defines us. Today, as we look back upon history, we can see a single red thread uniting it all. From the clay tablets of Sumer, to the step pyramids of Eridu, to Greek star charts and medieval models of the cosmos, all breathe the same ancient spirit. Though the temples have fallen and the gods' names have faded, their essence endures, not as deities upon high, but as a living part of human consciousness. What the Sumerians once called the grace of the gods, we now call intellect. What they revered as divine law, we call natural law. And what they named the light of Enki, the breath of Anu, is what we now recognize as curiosity, the hunger to understand and to create. In ancient inscriptions, Enki was said to speak to mankind. "I have placed knowledge in your hearts, wisdom in your hands, that you may build and become like the gods." Perhaps in that moment, the seed of civilization was planted. The Sumerians were the first to write history, using cuneiform, the script they believed was a gift from Enki himself. Every civilization since has followed their path, for to preserve knowledge is to learn the language of the divine. They invented mathematics to measure rivers and seasons, and their sexagesimal system, base 60, still beats in every clock today. When we say, An hour has 60 minutes, or a circle has 360 degrees. We are echoing the voices of Sumerian priests who once looked to the stars and whispered, "This order is not of man, but of the universe." They charted the heavens, recorded the cycles of the moon, the sun, Venus, and Jupiter, believing the Anunnaki dwelled upon these celestial thrones, revealing fate through their motions. From this faith, astronomy was born. The Babylonians refined it, transforming belief into calculation. They mapped eclipses, measured planetary orbits, and left tables so precise that Greek astronomers built upon them. Arab scholars preserved them, and modern science arose from them. Each time a scientist lifts a telescope to the night sky, they unknowingly repeat the gesture of those Sumerian stargazers, the first humans who dared to believe they could comprehend the language of the gods. But the legacy of the Anunnaki was not only knowledge, it was justice, morality, and the human spirit. The Code of Hammurabi, carved into black basalt nearly 4,000 years ago, begins with a prayer to Anu and Enlil, those who entrusted law to mankind. To the Sumerians, justice did not come from man's will, but reflected the cosmic harmony ordained by the gods. Today, though our courts and constitutions take new forms, the belief that law stands above power remains their enduring gift. And in art, poetry, and myth, humanity has continued to retell that ancient story in new tongues, with new symbols. From the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's quest for immortality, to Homer's Odyssey, Dante's Divine Comedy, and even the dreams of spacefarers reaching beyond the stars, all are the same longing, the desire to touch eternity, to become one with the divine. The Sumerians once wrote, "Man was created to carry the burden of the gods." But across the ages, man has not only carried, he has created. And in doing so, he has become a co-creator, shaping the world alongside the memory of his makers. When the temples of Nippur and Uruk crumbled into dust, and the gods' names vanished into the wind, their spirit did not die. It transformed, from stone to parchment, from prayer to formula, from faith to reason. The Anunnaki did not disappear. They became one with the human mind. Perhaps that is the truest immortality. Not statues of stone, nor thrones of gold, but the idea that humankind can understand the universe, and through that understanding, become like the gods. That unspoken testament lives on in Babylonian scribes, Greek philosophers, and modern scientists alike. When we build spaceships that pierce the heavens, when we craft machines that decode dark matter, when we simulate life and intelligence, we are continuing their legacy. They once built bridges between earth and sky with ziggurats. We now build bridges between planets and stars with technology. They molded humans from clay and divine breath. We now recreate life from genes and algorithms. The difference is only in form. For we have become the new Anunnaki, shaping the cosmos with our own hands. And so, the circle turns again. Mankind, born of earth, dreaming of the sky, now reaches the stars, carrying within the same ancient spark. If the Anunnaki still exist, perhaps they watch us now, not with wrath or distance, but with pride. For what they began, the search for knowledge, the hunger for meaning, the belief that order can be understood, has blossomed into the radiance of human civilization. Myth may be story, but stories create reality. And as we continue to seek the secrets of the universe, we walk the path they first opened. A Sumerian tablet once bore the words, "What begins in heaven ends upon the earth, and what is born on earth returns to the stars." Perhaps the journey of humanity is just that, born from clay, reaching toward the heavens, and in the end, returning to the stars, where the tale of the Anunnaki still unfolds, no longer in temples, but in the mind, the curiosity, and the endless dreams of humankind.